Hey, it's Pat here with another talking point. Today's episode is something that I've actually been really digging into over the last couple of years. Back in 2019, Chris McLeod and John Talper and I were talking about robotics on an episode of The Full Force. And in the process of gathering information and really making things clear to myself for that episode, I ended up sparking a very thorough interest in robotics and kind of went after a full collection, but was also going after more information, just anything that I could learn about them. And I seem to have uncovered a bit more, so this is a little bit of a follow-up to that episode. If you haven't listened to it, we'll include a link to that in the comments. Just a bit of a background on robotics. Robotics was a toy line in the early 80s, 1984, that was released by Milton Bradley, and the entire play pattern of it revolved around building parts to make robots that were motorized, and it served the function of being very educational for kids while also being very fun. And the original sets actually advertised on them that they were compatible with all of your 3 3/4 inch action figures, but it also included one 5 points of articulation figure. And as time progressed, that figure just kept on getting better, and they included different ones. Later in the line, actually not much later in the line, Milton Bradley was purchased by Hasbro, and there was a cartoon that they made. Hasbro later sold the line to Learning Curve, and Learning Curve kind of took the strategy of selling robotics to stores that were more educational in focus. And I kind of just wanted to take a look today at all of the various figures that came with them, because in my opinion, when I first saw this, I think that my mindset was about the same as everybody else. This is a 5 POA figure that would look great in my Mos Eisley Creature Cantina. I'm just going to kind of show you what all was made very quickly, and then maybe we'll take a look at some things that weren't made as well. This was released as Commander X originally, and there were a couple of changes made to Commander X. The first thing that changed about him is they actually changed the face sculpt to be a little bit thinner, but then they changed him even more because they decided to include a backpack on the back that could actually play into the robotics play pattern, because it has a hole in the back that would actually connect to robotics. So I don't know what you may build from this, but hey, that's up to a kid's imagination, what they want to build. That's the entire point of robotics. Then after that figure was released, oh, and by the way, whenever Hasbro made the cartoon, these characters did end up included, but they looked very different. A lot of the character models for the cartoon were relatively similar as far as the uniform goes, with just a different head, and none of them looked like they did as toys. The Commander X in the cartoon, while they referred to him as Commander X once, they revealed that his entire name was Exeter Galaxon. And then as a toy, Commander X was repainted into the character that's also in the show, Traxxas Light. And Traxxas came with Venturac and was head-to-toe repainted from that third variant of Commander X. Now, while I've been looking for these, I wanted to note that I've actually kind of found two different Traxxas Light figures. They're a slightly different blue, and you can kind of see that some of the paint applications are different on them. I would actually say this second one that I found is a little bit better. The black on the top of the helmet goes down the sides of the stripe of the helmet, whereas the original one does not. And the paint, I will say, on this one is just a little more crisp. I don't really know why that's the case, other than to, probably rightly guess that it was a different production run. The visors on them are also a little bit different. One of them is a little more transparent than the other. And it's probably important to note that on this figure, these visors can't be removed. Brian Kaufman actually pointed out to me that he had one where it looked like somebody tried to remove it and they cracked half of it off, and the other half actually stayed on because it's connected by a post inside the head. Then after they released Traxxas Light, they released Toron Oxus, who came with Bront, That is this figure that is an entirely different sculpt. I've always really enjoyed the zippers on the backs of his legs and how they're not evenly zipped up. It just gives a very real-world look to this figure. I love this one. And then the last figure that was released by Hasbro is Gaxon Graves. And Gaxon Graves is, like Traxxas Light, he's actually one of the bad guys. He kind of has a notched helmet that looks pretty cool, and he comes with this other backpack with tanks. And he was included with Tyrannix. Then whenever Hasbro handed things over to Learning Curve, the first figure that they made was the Space Scout. Now the Space Scout is kind of just a lighter color of Tauron Oxus. Tauron Oxus is a little bit of a darker tan than the Space Scout. Kind of a little bit of a generic name, but still a very cool figure. So whichever one you get, it could be either one. The visor and the whole figure are different. And you can usually tell the difference between them because wherever it had the MB for Milton Bradley on the original figures, that has been cleared off by Learning Curve so that it doesn't have that on it. Things got more interesting, though, after the Space Scout, and Learning Curve released Lieutenant Denver. I'm not really sure which order these came out in. I'm kind of just presenting them in an order that's kind of interesting to me. Because Lieutenant Denver is actually the same mold as the Space Scout, but he's in silver with some yellow and black highlights. Then this figure they just kind of referred to on some of the packages as the Mission Leader. He's a little harder to come by. And it is the same mold as Gaxon Graves, only he is in black, and then he has silver and gold, and a little bit of purple. Next up we have this figure, that on some of the packages that I saw, they referred to him as Pilot Rox, and on others they referred to him as Commander Zeo. So I guess technically maybe I need to own two of these, just because they're two different characters. That's okay, I'll just own one. But he is actually the same mold and sculpt as Hasbro's Gaxon Graves, but in the colors of Traxxas Light, which is kind of cool because both of those are the bad guys within the Hasbro line. So he supplements that stuff very well, even though Lieutenant Denver, none of these Learning Curve toys were any of the characters that were in the Hasbro cartoon. That wouldn't have made sense for them to do that. They're just kind of slapping names on a package and giving us cool new colors. But similarly to that, they actually took that same mold and put it in the same colors as Exeter Galaxon. And then the last one, I probably paid a little bit too much to get this, but I wanted to have it in nice shape, and I wanted to make sure that I got the visor, and it just doesn't pop up very often. This one also doesn't have a name, unfortunately, but it is that same mold as Gaxon Graves, and it is in blue with an orange visor. Now, I have seen this with a tan visor online. I don't know if other sets included it, and maybe they threw the other visor in there, but the set that I saw him included in, it actually had a lot of this clear plastic with the primary toy, and then this helmet also, or this visor, I should say, also included. So I'm not quite sure if it came two different ways or not, but I'm happy to have it the way that's slightly more unique. So those were the figures that were released, and I think that they would fill a cantina quite well. But moving on, there were some other things that remained unreleased, and they're inside this catalog right here. And the first five that I want to just kind of mention didn't actually look like they were going to include a figure at all. They were smaller sets, so they probably would not have. With Robotix, there were a lot of smaller sets throughout the line that just didn't. The line was primarily about the building aspect and the robots. So some of these actually look to me, though, like they may have included parts that would have also been used to make some of the unreleased robots from the cartoon, because the cartoon features several robots that didn't come out, as well as human drivers for each one of those robots. And the cartoon does make it very clear that this human is the driver of this robot. So it's a little bit strange that some of those were never released. And honestly, in this catalog, most of those still are not shown. However, there are 5 of them that are mentioned that do not have pilots and are shown in here. Among them, there is Vortrek. I think most of the pieces here actually look like they did come out. I'm not so sure about those missiles on the back end, but you can actually see that they've included the box art for all of these figures as well. The next one is Xanox. And Xanox, in my opinion, that central canopy, the area where a figure is pictured sitting, which I think it probably would have said figure sold separately on the box, but that cockpit actually looks very similar to the one that is animated with Nara in the cartoon. So I'm kind of wondering if we're seeing maybe some of the parts that would have been used to make some of those unreleased robots on additional toys. That's not to say for sure that those robots would have been canceled at this point and the parts are being repurposed, because it's possible that the parts were going to serve a dual purpose anyway, because that's kind of the way things go with robotics. Next up we have Targon. That's a name that's familiar to me. He looks somewhat like a crocodile. This definitely would have been a smaller set, but it would have been motorized, so it looks like it probably would have been a cool little addition. Then we have Raynor, who looks like he has a little bit of a beak, and I'm really not sure if that corresponds to anyone that was in the show. This last one certainly doesn't look like it corresponds to anything in the show, and these parts all look somewhat familiar to me. I think that you'd be able to make a pretty reasonable recreation of Zordak. So that is it for the smaller robots that would not have included a figure. But let's take a look at the last two, because they would have included figures. First up we have Boltar. And Boltar was one of the ones that we had uncovered in that Full Force episode, but here he is in toy form. And unfortunately, this catalog doesn't actually call out the names of the two pilots that we're going to look at. It's unfortunate, but judging from the cartoon, I think that we can figure out who they are. In the show, Boltar was paired with a character named Flexor Tull, but he really probably would have come with the kid of the show named Zaru. And part of the reason why I think that is after we did that Full Force episode, I actually saw this figure standing, and he's shorter than the other robotics figures. So that to me indicates that it probably was a kid. And in the show, there actually was a significant portion of it where instead of Flexor Tull piloting Boltar, it was Zaru piloting Boltar. So I think that the figure that we are looking at here is Zaru. And the last one, I kind of wanted to save this for last because we had not seen this one at all yet. And this is Stegor. He actually was one of the bigger bad guys in the show. He was up to no good quite a lot, as snake bad guys are prone to do. And he probably would have included the same character that he has in the show, which is Nomo Yell. It doesn't come as a surprise to me that Nomo Yell doesn't look anything like he did in the show, because so far none of these figures look like they did in the cartoon. Oh, and I should mention that there was another figure that went unreleased back in 1984 on the R340 set, which was mostly just parts. There was a tan commander figure that was just referred to as a hero in the set, and that figure never was released. And I have to say that of everything in the catalog, the thing that I was hoping to see the most was Nemesis with Canuck Creant, who was the bad guy robot, the leader of the bad guy robots, and the leader of the bad guy humans that would have come together that I still have not seen. I have to assume that it would have been a very large toy. Maybe it would have been the largest toy yet, or maybe it would have been the same size as Argus, which pretty much was the biggest one that Hasbro put out. So I don't know, it's a little bit of a mystery to me as to why we haven't seen those. So that unfortunately does it. There isn't anything else in this book. There actually should have been a couple of pages showing me the Milton Bradley G.I. Joe and Transformers action cards. Unfortunately, the copy of the catalog that I received was missing those pages. So if you have those pages, I'd be curious to see them. If you have any other robotics things to add, any more information, I would love to hear it. Please leave a comment. I really appreciate that every single time I see anything. I try to respond. It's definitely a lot of fun digging this stuff up and talking about it. So thanks again. Thanks for the Full Force. and Chris McLeod for spurring me to even look into these. I hope that I have all of the released figures at the very least, though I would also love to have those two figures someday in my collection. I can dream. Leave a comment. Thanks again.
Thanks for watching this episode of Articulated Points. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'd appreciate it if you would like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to learn more about some of the toys featured in this episode or want to follow us on social media, links are in the description below this video.